Okay, we're waiting for our attendees to join. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. For those of you who don't know the center, we're an institution that preserves the values and legacy of Israel's sixth Prime Minister Menachem Begin. One of those values, and certainly one that's very relevant for my work here at the center, is diaspora relations, Israel diaspora relations. My work is involved in providing content for English speakers, both here in Israel and outside. And Menachem Begin was very committed to the unity of the Jewish people and the idea that Israel and diaspora Jewry should have a very strong and mutually strengthening relationship. Next week, America goes to vote for a new president. And that is a moment, I think, of profound significance for both Israel and for diaspora Jews. America is Israel's closest and indispensable ally, and America is home to, by far, the world's largest diaspora Jewish population. So who the president is matters to Israel, and it matters to American Jews. My hope is that this debate that we're about to hear will help anyone who has a vote and is still undecided to make up their mind, and to help those of us who don't have a vote to make up our minds who we can hope wins next week. So I'm going to ask each of our debaters to give an opening statement of not more than 3 minutes, and I'll ask them to respond to each other. I'm going to ask a couple of questions to follow up, and then I'll turn the floor over to you, to our audience, for your questions, which you can write in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Okay, our first debater in the blue corner will be arguing for electing Vice President Kamala Harris next Tuesday. We're very grateful and delighted to be able to welcome Halie Soifer, the Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Prior to that, she served for nearly 2 decades as a national security advisor for 4 members of Congress, a senior policy advisor in the Obama administration, and as a foreign policy expert and civil servant. Most recently, she was national security advisor to then Senator Kamala Harris. Previously, she was foreign policy advisor for Senators Coons and Ted Kaufman and Congressman Robert Wexler. She was also, for more than 2 years, serving in the Obama administration as senior policy advisor to U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power. Additionally, she served in the Bush administration as a civil servant in the State Department's Bureau of Political and Military Affairs. And during President Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, Halie was the campaign's Florida Jewish Vote Director. She has a master's degree from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Middle East Studies and a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan Honors College. Halie Soifer, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm proud to join you today in support of Kamala Harris. This election presents the American people with the starkest contrast between 2 presidential candidates in a single election in our history. Kamala Harris is a defender of democracy, at home and abroad. And Donald Trump has attacked our democracy, admires and aligns with dictators, past and present, and has pledged to be a dictator himself on day 1. And while I know the focus of what we'll discuss today is about Israel, I begin with democracy because it is the #1 issue for Jewish voters here in the United States in this election, just as it was in the last election. And we cannot support our democratic allies, including Israel, if America is no longer a democracy itself. Kamala Harris has been a longstanding ally of the Jewish community in the face of rising anti-Semitism. While Donald Trump has emboldened anti-Semites and dangerous right-wing extremists, trafficked in anti-Semitic rhetoric, denigrated millions of American Jews in this election, and scapegoated the Jewish people as responsible for a potential election loss. And on Israel, Kamala Harris is a staunch and unwavering supporter of the U.S. Israel relationship, which I saw firsthand as her national security advisor in the Senate. I traveled to Israel with her in 2017. We visited Iron Dome batteries, and I witnessed her deep commitment to our bilateral security ties and U.S. military assistance. Since October 7th, Kamala Harris has repeatedly provided assurances that she will always give Israel the ability to defend itself. She's made good on her commitment with her actions, including providing more assistance to Israel since October 7th than any year in history, and has twice deployed the U.S. military to defend Israel against the direct threat posed by Iran. Donald Trump's policy toward Israel is best summarized by his former national security advisor, John Bolton, who has repeatedly said that Donald Trump's support of Israel is not guaranteed in a second term. There's so much at stake in this election, and Jewish voters have the ability to shape the outcome of this election. We are strongly encouraging them to vote for Kamala Harris and confident that 7 out of 10 Jewish voters will continue to support Democrats as they have for decades. Because Kamala Harris stands for decency, truth, moral clarity, as opposed to the darkness, hatred, vitriol, and lies represented by the twice impeached, 34-time convicted felon who believes Hitler did some good things. So it's very important that we think about the history of the Jewish people, which requires us to do better than an aspiring dictator like Donald Trump. And we have a chance to do so in this election.
Oh, okay. That's
Thank
your
you
3
so
minutes.
much.
That's your 3 minutes. Thank you very much, Halie Soifer. Okay, and in the red corner, our second debater, who will be, of course, advocating for re-electing former President Donald Trump, is Peter Deutsch. Peter Deutsch served for 6 terms as a U.S. congressman from Florida. He was first elected to the Florida House of Representatives in September of 1982. In his first term in the state legislature, Peter Deutsch introduced and passed legislation which allowed government entities in Florida to invest in Israel bonds. In his first term in the U.S. Congress, he introduced legislation which prevented Hamas members from being granted visas to enter the United States. After leaving Congress, he was the national co-chair with Senator Joe Lieberman of the coalition opposing the JCPOA. Many of you will know that's Obama's Iran agreement, nuclear agreement. After leaving Congress, he also created the first Hebrew English charter school and Hebrew charter school network in the United States. He's lived in Florida and Israel since leaving Congress in January 2005. And actually since October the 8th last year, he's been in Israel most of the time. His daughter, son-in-law, and their 4 children live in Israel. His son-in-law was called up to serve in the IDF on October 7th and spent 2 months in Gaza as a combat soldier. Congressman Peter Deutsch, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And it really is an honor to be at a forum at the Begin Center and the history and the legacy of the center. I would encourage anyone who hasn't been there and has taken advantage of the resources to use the resources. I would agree with one thing, and maybe one thing only, that Halie said, that this is the most consequential election in our lifetime. And I would also say something that maybe Halie doesn't agree with, which I agree with President Trump about, that Israel's existential existence is on the ballot in 1 week from today in the presidential election of the United States. And a follow-up to that, I would say to you that there are 500,000 American voters in Israel. Hopefully all of them have voted. I'm sure many have not voted. There's still time to vote. Many states allow you to vote by fax ballot. If not, FedEx works very well in Israel, so you can FedEx your ballot to whichever state was your last legal residence, particularly if it's in the 7 swing states, it becomes much more relevant. I would also tell you that for those watching this or live or watching it on YouTube after, if you're not an American voter, but you're concerned about the existential threat to Israel, and you know any Americans at all, I would encourage them to vote and be involved in the election, because literally, as I said, there's an existential issue involved in this election for the state of Israel and for Jews and for the world. And so let me talk about that a little bit. Every person in America going through the process of who they're going to vote for thinks and weighs different issues. For me, the most important thing that the President of the United States does is try to achieve and maintain peace in the world. If we look at the 4 years of the Trump administration, we had peace, we had prosperity, we had no wars. If we look at the last 4 years of the Harris-Biden administration, we literally have wars, we have death, we have destruction. And I would tie a lot of that to the different policies, 180-degree different policies of the 2 candidates. Specifically, I would also focus on Iran. President Trump, when he came into office, effectively on the first day that he came into office, he stopped the funding for Iran. Iran, after the 4 years of his administration, was, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt. Their national reserves were effectively zero. Their funding for their terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, had stopped. Unfortunately, effectively, the first day that the Biden-Harris administration came into office, they started and allowed the funding. So a conservative number of how much money they have gotten, Iran has gotten in the last 4 years, is $100 billion. The calculations could be definitely higher. That money has gone directly to Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and literally they have used that money to kill Americans, to kill Israelis, obviously, and to kill other foreign nationals. That's your
time. That's your time. And we're going to have plenty of time to explore these issues more. Thank you very much, Congressman Peter Deutsch. So what I want to do now is give each of you time for a short response to something that you heard, just a minute and a half to respond to one of the things that was said by your opponent. Halie Soifer, if we'll start with you, you have a minute and a half to respond to one or more of the things that you heard from Congressman Deutsch.
Great. I'll actually respond to two things. The first is I'm glad that Peter mentioned the fact that Donald Trump said on our debate stage, it's actually the only policy that he articulated at the debate about Israel, that Israel's very existence is contingent on him winning this election. It's important to consider the U.S. Israel relationship has endured for 75 years, no matter who's in power in Israel or the United States, which party, who's prime minister, who's president. How could it be that we have a candidate running for the president of the United States who believes that Israel's future survival is somehow contingent on his own political aspirations? It exemplifies really the fact that Donald Trump's foreign policy, his policy toward Israel, as with everything else, is solely predicated on what he thinks is best for himself. And this is what his national security advisor has told us as well. The second point that I want to refute that Peter said was this idea that somehow this administration is giving Iran money. It's patently false for two reasons. One is that this administration has continued the Trump era sanctions on Iran. They've kept all of those sanctions in place, and they've increased them by almost 700 additional sanctions. The second issue that Peter's referring to has to do with a waiver in our sanctions that allows Iran to sell oil to Iraq. This policy was started in 2018, and I'm going to quote Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, explaining it. He explained that the revenue cannot be used for anything other than humanitarian purposes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Halie Soifer. Okay, Congressman, same to you.
I think the most important point, maybe in this whole debate, and for people listening to get out their phones or their computers and fact check. Halie and I mean, Halie is just flat out wrong in her assessment of the amount of money that Iran is getting because of a change in policy. It is a minimum of $100 billion because they have not enforced the sanctions. They have allowed Iran to sell their oil. It is a fact. It's not a theory. It's not something I'm taking out of thin air. You can just, it's easily verifiable for everyone listening. All right, they have gotten at least $100 billion. Their reserves, which is a public record, were effectively at zero. They have $70 billion in reserves at this point. And it's not a very complicated issue. I don't think it's a very complicated choice in terms of this election. They have taken that money. And so let's put it this way. There are two candidates in this race. One candidate has literally given people money who are literally killing your family. Just yesterday, an additional 5 Israeli soldiers died. I mean, tomorrow, who knows? They've killed Americans as well, other foreign nationals. So there's one candidate who has literally given someone money who is killing and wants to continue to kill and actually wants to kill everyone in your family. And there's another candidate for 4 years who's kept your family safe and has really improved the condition of the world. I agree with President Trump that this is an existential threat. And let me talk to you about why. I was in Israel when 200 ballistic missiles were shot. I was in the safe room in my apartment. and easily
I'll let you finish this point.
wants to put nuclear weapons on those missiles. If there was one nuclear weapon on that one of those missiles, and again, we don't know exactly how many missiles got through, but we know that at least some did. One of those missiles with a nuclear warhead, I would not be on this webcast today. I would be dead, and Israel effectively would not be existing. So that is, by definition, the definition of an existential threat. And I think it's clear which candidate would more likely prevent that from happening than the other.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so now I'm going to push you both on a couple of things. I think that both candidates have received criticism from sections of the Jewish or Israeli community, and obviously in an election cycle, there's often hysteria and hyperbole and extreme statements and these kinds of things. But I also think that there's also been a lot of reasonable criticism which has been leveled, which is, which I'd like to put to the two of you. Maybe as Halie started the debate, I'll go to you first, Congressman, with this. You based your main point of in your opening statement was about that President Trump kept the world and certainly Israel safe, and safer, you say, than President Biden did. What's your response to the claim that because of Trump's at least the criticism goes that Trump is very much is a fan of certain authoritarian leaders around the world, including Putin and Kim Jong-un and Erdogan in Turkey, that he's just not committed to the basic concept of being president of the leader of the free world. That he's just not, that whole idea of America as the leader of the democratic world of the West, to which Israel is a member, is something that Trump is not part of, and that even if you believe that he's done better or did better on, say, Iran, the fact that he's seems to have an admiration for Vladimir Putin wouldn't be a good thing for Israel, given the close relations between Russia and Iran and that whole sort of axis of authoritarian regimes of which Iran is part.
So let me respond two things. One is we have 4 years of President Trump as president, and what did he do, about that validates the debunked theories that you're addressing? I mean, I think every one of these theories are debunked. When you have no evidence, that's what you say. And I would also say to you that the sort of argument that you're expressing in terms of as it affects Israel, or as it should affect Jewish voters, is you have a house that literally is on fire. Israeli soldiers are in combat today, potentially. I mean, as I said, 5 died yesterday. The house is on fire. Israel's existential existence is being threatened right now. The house is on fire, and you're talking about doing renovations 10 years from now. This isn't a debate format, and let me sort of acknowledge Haley's best argument. If I believe that Donald Trump was really a threat to democracy, I mean, I've had conversations, and I believe Haley believes that. If I believe that he was a threat to democracy, I've talked to, before, I didn't come to this decision lightly. I don't think you mentioned in the introduction, I served as a Democratic member of the United States Congress. I was a leader in the Democratic Party. I've mentored some of the present leaders of the Democratic Party, including the governor of Pennsylvania who worked for me, including a former national head of the Democratic Party. People who I'm friends with, and I believe I'm still friends with, have told me they think there's a 75% chance that democracy is going to end if Trump is elected. It's absurd. I mean, what's the mechanism he's going to do to that? And we have nothing to point to that. These are debunked theories. Haley quotes John Bolton. For any of us who've had employees, John Bolton is a disgruntled former employee who is criticizing that, and I discount what he's saying. In terms of the issue of anti-Semitism that she also raised, just a chance to raise it, there is a fundamental difference, I think, between the two candidates. Donald Trump has done things to prevent anti-Semitism in the United States in terms of Title VI Amendment. Donald Trump has met with people who are anti-Semitic, and Haley and I have gone through this. Kamala Harris has met with as many, if not more. They're just not publicized as much, and we can go through a list. One of the pastors that gave us a prayer at her inauguration is an anti-Semite. Do I think Kamala Harris is an anti-Semite? No. I don't think Donald Trump is either. Just because you're meeting with people, sometimes hopefully you're meeting with them to change their positions on issues.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I should have said, sorry, that was you had 2 minutes to respond to that. I told you that before we started the debate, but I should have let the audience know. That was a 2 minute, you had 2 minutes for that. So thank you very much, Congressman. Halie, I'm going to give you 2 minutes as well oh, you want to respond to, okay, so you know what? I'm going to give you 90 seconds to respond to Congressman Deutsch, and then I'm going to give him a chance to respond to your response to me, okay? So yeah, you have a minute and a half.
Okay. So this idea that somehow we shouldn't worry about Donald Trump's stated intention and 920-page plan, Project 2025, which was written by 140 Trump allies and former officials. And keep in mind, it's not a disgruntled, John Bolton is not a disgruntled former employee. There are 24 high-level Trump officials that are warning the American people not to elect this man. Including his former Secretary of Defense, both his former chiefs of staff. I could go through the list. The House is on fire here in the United States because we have someone who wants to be a dictator who very well could win this incredibly close election in 6 days. Also, there are very clear ties between not just Donald Trump and Putin, whom he has spoken to 7 times since leaving office and supposedly sent him COVID tests demonstrating their clear alliance, but there are ties between Russia and Iran, which Peter has rightfully and Kamala Harris has identified as the #1 security threat that we face. In the past month, the U.S. confirmed that Iran has given a number of close-range ballistic missiles to Russia. They have a very clear alliance. So I think we need to be concerned about the fact that Donald Trump has aligned himself with Vladimir Putin, who is aligned with Iran. And this idea that Kamala Harris has spoken with anti-Semites is patently false. She has led an effort to combat anti-Semitism, the first ever White House strategy to counter anti-Semitism. She's repeatedly denounced the forms of anti-Semitism that have emerged in our country, including after October 7th, on college campuses and elsewhere. And honestly, Donald Trump is an anti-Semite. He has trafficked in anti-Semitic rhetoric. One need look no further than the rally he held at Madison Square Garden to see the kind of vitriol, bigotry, and anti-Semitism he represents.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. So,
want me to respond to her response? I mean, we can go back.
That's not part of the rules, Peter.
I'm sure you'd like to, but I don't. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a question now to Halie, and if you want to, you can include.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So Halie, my question to you, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond. So Israelis were generally very impressed after October 7th with the immediate support they got from President Biden, his visit, the aircraft carriers into the Mediterranean that helped deter Hezbollah. But in recent months, I think there's been a sense, at least among some Israelis, that the administration has sought to tie Israel's hands. And perhaps when Israel needed to get the job done in Gaza and Lebanon, they were being restrained by Washington. So, for example, the operation in Rafah was delayed, probably, so the theory goes, because of pressure from the U.S. Washington sort of ceasefire in Lebanon just before we embarked on a spectacularly successful series of operations in Lebanon, which removed the top echelons of Hezbollah. So, really a response to that, and really, I think more importantly, given this debate, would a President Kamala Harris allow Israel to continue the war until its objectives were met?
This administration has given Israel an unprecedented amount of support, multiple ways of supporting Israel since October 7th. The first has been, of course, an unequivocal condemnation that's come from Kamala Harris in light of the horrific terror that we saw on October 7th. The second has been unprecedented amounts of military aid, $17.8 billion of military assistance, hundreds of military shipments, including recently, just on October 13th, the deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery, which is a high-level new missile defense system that we have given the United States has given Israel on behalf of this administration, which comes with U.S. troops. And as you mentioned, twice deploying U.S. military resources and service members to the Eastern Mediterranean in advance of Iranian strikes in order to intercept those missiles to ensure that those in Israel were kept safe. This has been an unprecedented amount of assistance provided, and it was Republicans in Congress who not just initially conditioned this assistance, but then actually delayed it. J.D. Vance voted against that aid not once, but twice. Now, he said it was because it provided the assistance also to Ukraine, demonstrating yet again that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have this isolationist worldview that aligns with Vladimir Putin. So it's incredibly important to consider the repeated statements and actions that have been taken by this administration and the fact that it is President Biden and Vice President Harris are together on this. They are on the same page. And I can say, because I saw it firsthand, that Vice President Harris entered this White House sharing the views of President Biden with regard to Israel. We've only seen her commitment strengthened in light of the unprecedented security threats that Israel has faced in the past year from Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas. And at each point, she has supported the Israeli objective of eliminating those threats, including Sinwar and Nasrallah.
Okay, thank you very much. Congressman, you have a minute and a half to respond to.
So let me try to go relatively quickly because there's so many things to correct and fact check. The first is the assistance issue. The House passed a bill with assistance. The Harris-Biden administration refused to allow that to be taken up in the Senate. That's a fact. It passed the House effectively very quickly, and because of the administration of Harris-Biden, it was not allowed to get passed. The second thing regarding Kamala Harris's support and the Biden administration's support of Israel, it's a fact. In fact, unfortunately, Kamala Harris brags about it. And don't listen to me. Go online and you can watch it in her own words. She's proud of the fact that America restricted weapon sales, weapon shipments to Israel. She has talked glowingly about that. And specifically, it says, well, we potentially could do more. It's almost every time she opens her mouth, she's talking about the tragedy of the Palestinians. She has specifically, in her own words, talked about the binary issues regarding Gaza. There are no binary issues in Gaza. She really does not understand the moral clarity of this issue, like Senator John Fetterman and myself and others, and Donald Trump. The issue, we grieve for innocent Palestinians that die in Gaza, but none of them would die if Hamas didn't do what they did and are still embedding themselves where they are. Let me also quickly mention, she mentioned the 2025 plan. It has nothing to do with President Trump or his administration. She talked about 24 former disgruntled employees. President Trump, just issued, probably in response to people like you saying this, again, debunked sort of theory, 300 former generals, high-ranking officials that work with him, endorsing his administration and his reelection.
Okay. I have a lot more questions that I could ask, but I'm going to, we started to get questions coming in, so I'm going to turn over to questions from the audience. What I'm going to do is, as much as possible, I want to make it even and have, questions for each of you, one from a sort of more from a pro-Harris position, one from a more pro-Trump position. We'll see how we go. If I see that there's too many questions on one side, then I'm going to add some of my own questions to even it out a little. There's a question here. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond, and then the other debater can also has a minute and a half to rebut that if they wish. This is one for you, Senator Congressman Deutsch. I'm not going to read it verbatim because it's long, and I'll just summarize. This is from, I think, Paula. She basically accuses Donald Trump of being a convicted felon and says that you shouldn't be voting for a convicted felon. But further, that's a statement. Her question is more about the fact that he doesn't believe in NATO, and therefore he wants to isolate the US from the rest of the West, and that's dangerous for America and Israel and sort of the wider Western world. And she goes on to say that his base, contrary to your point about rebutting the anti-Semitism point, that his base includes people like the Proud Boys and other sort of white supremacist or alt-right groups. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, again, first off, let me specifically, and it's also responding to something Halie sent previously. In terms of Kamala Harris meeting with anti-Semites, she met with students of the group of Al-Quds University, which is run by Hamas. I mean, I don't know if Hamas is not anti-Semitic, I don't know who is. She met with the Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is part of the Honduras government, who's an anti-Semite, Nasrallah, who's a part of the government, Salvador Nasrallah, who's an anti-Semite, the women that ran the march on Washington, the Salamar, she literally had to leave her position because she's an anti-Semite. She's met with plenty of anti-Semites. I don't know the score, more, less than Trump. They both have met with anti-Semites. I don't think she's an anti-Semite. I mean, I think, President Trump's position as president, getting NATO to basically step up, NATO members to step up and pay their fair share, I think was a very favorable thing in terms of NATO and the Western alliance, in terms of making it stronger. Putin did not invade Ukraine under his watch. They invaded under Biden's watch. When President Trump has talked about the fact that there would not be a war in Ukraine or a war in the Middle East, I think, again, obviously we're never going to know, but I think you can make a very good case about that. It's not just, his position, but his willing to use American power in terms of, and again, it gives a contrast in terms of Vice President Harris. When he eliminated General Soleimani, then Senator Harris literally, in her own words, issues a statement that it was a mistake. I mean, Soleimani and that issue, I think, is part of the question in terms of just the bigger picture. This is not about America. I'm sorry, this is about America. It's not about Israel. It's not about Israel. It's about America. Israel is obviously affected. Iran wants to destroy the United States. It doesn't want to just destroy Israel. The nuclear weapons that it wants to put on ballistic missiles are geared to the United States. Okay. The actions that they want to take on the floor of the parliament of Iran, they scream death to America. We know for a fact that Iran has tried to kill President Trump on American soil. Okay,
thank you very much. Halie, do you want to rebut that? You have a minute and a half, if so.
Okay, sure. I'm glad that the questioner brought up the fact that for the first time in American history, we do have a convicted felon running for president. It's important to remember that Trump was found guilty on 34 charges of a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election through hush money payments to a porn star. Those convictions don't include the civil lawsuits against him. He's found liable for sexual assault, rape, and yes, that's who's running for president. It's important to also, Peter said something about the peaceful time under his watch. Iran attacked American troops in Iraq on Donald Trump's watch. We had 100 U.S. troops with traumatic brain injuries on Donald Trump's watch. What did Donald Trump say about it? He minimized it and belittled their injuries, calling them headaches. For the first time, Iran attacked and hurt U.S. troops. So that's the kind of commander-in-chief apparently he wants to be. And yes, it's incredibly dangerous, the idea that he would withdraw from NATO, which he has threatened, because we can't be isolationists like this. We can't be a successful ally and partner of our security allies like Israel if we are not a part of a multilateral alliance like NATO. Just look at our operations to ensure Israel's security recently against the direct Iranian threats in April and October. How did we do that? We also had partners. We worked with regional allies to ensure that we had the airspace and the other things that we needed to have those successful interceptions and operations. It's incredibly important that we work with our allies around the world. The idea of withdrawing from NATO is just a gift to Vladimir Putin. Okay. And keep in mind that, again, he is in line with Iran. And the idea that Kamala Harris has met with anti-Semites, first of all, it's...
Okay,
let me just finish with this. Peter spoke a little longer. Donald Trump refused to condemn white supremacy on the debate stage. Instead, he incited right-wing extremists who launched a deadly insurrection and attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power.
Halie, I'm going to ask you to stop, but thank you very much. Congressman, before I go to another question, I want to get one clarification from you. That just because you didn't address it, and I think it's important because Halie just raised it now, and I think it's an important point. The questioner specifically mentioned about NATO. Do you think, I guess just a very straight yes or no, and then do you believe that Trump does want to pull out of NATO? And if not, why does he?
I don't believe.
Why does he hint at it? And if yes, is that a problem?
Well, first off, again, I think I don't think he wants to get out of NATO. I think he wants the NATO members to pay their fair share, which he was a good negotiator. He got them to do it. He made NATO a lot stronger.
Okay, thank you. All right. I have a question for you, Halie, which is quite a simple question. I'm just going to read it out. Let me just find it now. It's typically, sorry, I did have it here. Just a second. So this is from Svi. He says, this election is unique in that both candidates have a record that can be compared. What is one major accomplishment that Kamala Harris can point to either as vice president or before?
Well, I think that something that's incredibly important to consider as it relates to Israel is the unprecedented amount of aid that has been provided in the past year to Israel. This administration has been staunch in its support of Israel in the aftermath of October 7th. I saw that firsthand, hearing directly from President Biden about their support, and we've all heard from Vice President Harris as she's repeatedly provided assurances and a commitment to ensuring Israel's security and right to self-defense. The $17.8 billion in assistance that's been provided by this administration to Israel in the aftermath of October 7th is more than any other year in our history by an exponential amount, more than 3 times more than any other year in U.S. history in terms of the amount of aid we've provided. And this has been incredibly important as Israel has needed this additional assistance. The delays that it took 6 months to pass this aid, were because Republicans delayed the package, which was unfortunate. And it was the president and Kamala Harris that encouraged this assistance to pass to make sure that Israel had it even quicker. And the vice president has been clear. Such aid will absolutely continue. She's provided repeat assurances that she will ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against the threat of Iran and its proxies.
Okay,
thank you very much. Do you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. You know, I sometimes when Halie speaks, in terms of her positions she's representing, I really feel the Alice in Wonderland thing. The administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has prevented Israel from doing some of the most significant actions that they needed to take in this war. The most significant really is probably preventing Israel from attacking Iran's nuclear systems. Within the last couple of weeks, I mean, the only reason that they did not was because President Biden prevented them from doing. President Trump publicly stated that that's what Israel should do, that they should attack and eliminate the weapon systems, the nuclear program of Iran. Again, I go back to what is this election really about? This election really is an existential vote about Israel's assistance. You have one candidate that supported a position which makes Israel, just fundamentally weaker for really until those weapon systems are eliminated. And then you have another candidate that would have supported it, even if the war never would have happened in the first place. The same thing, in terms of just the facts. The facts are there was a support bill that the Biden-Harris administration stopped in the Congress, but on top of that, almost at every step of the actions since October 7th, the Biden administration has been putting handcuffs on Israel's ability to execute the war. I mean, I don't think there's any question, and this is really a tragic statement I'm going to say, but I think it's supported by the facts. There's no question that less Israeli soldiers would die. There'd be less orphans, less widows in the state of Israel if the war was conducted, if President Trump was president, because Harris Biden has limited Israel's ability to conduct the war.
Okay, thank you. All right, here's a question for both of you. It's someone anonymous who asks, it's a question about the United Nations and the fact that the UN has, shall we say, not exactly been a friend to Israel, well, you could say for a longer period of time, but certainly since October 7th, and that the UN bears some responsibility for not condemning Hamas and for allowing a lot of the anti-Israel rhetoric to become so extreme and so widespread. So the question is whether you believe your candidate will call out and pressure the UN on Israel's behalf, because obviously the US has a lot more sway in the UN than Israel does. So how will your candidate deal with the UN's and sort of anti-Israel positions? Maybe we'll go to Halie first.
Well, there's no question that the UN has anti-Israel bias. We saw this going back to the 70s with Zionism as racism, and many administrations, including this one, have stood up for Israel at the UN. And this administration has vetoed many UN Security Council resolutions that it viewed as biased against Israel in support of that position to defend Israel in international bodies. This is also just a tenet of the Democratic Party's views as it relates to defending Israel on the world stage. In our Democratic Party platform, which is the strongest party platform that either party has ever had, it mentions Israel 29 times. There are 3 pages of our party platform that are specifically dedicated to Israel, and it includes a condemnation of anti-Semitism. I'm proud to have played a role in the development of this platform, and it includes this line. I'll just read it to you. The administration opposes any effort to unfairly single out and delegitimize Israel, including at the United Nations. So this is codified within the tenets of what the Democratic Party stands for. This is the platform that Kamala Harris approved and our party unanimously approved in Chicago as part of the convention. And this is what we stand for. We defend Israel at the UN.
Thank you very much. Congressman.
Again, there's a fundamental difference between the two candidates. I mean, sometimes when Kamala Harris says she's going to support Israel's right to defend itself, I really envision her thinking that Israel can defend itself with bows and arrows. The same issue in terms of the UN. President Trump has been saying consistently 100% supportive of Israel. I was at Madison Square Garden for 8 hours. Halie, contrary to what you said, it was not Nazis. There were variety of people, Jews, Blacks, Hispanics there. Multiple times people talked about 100% support of Israel. That would have been impossible for anyone, and no one said it on the stage of the Democratic Convention. So again, unfortunately, the UN at this point in time is a joke. And I also, though, so I'm going to try to use my time, because I know we have limited time, respond to 2 things that I didn't respond to, have the opportunity to respond to in terms of what Halie had said previously. President Trump was convicted in a court, but he was convicted, he was tried in a situation, a criminal allegation that no one in the history of America had ever been tried for. The convoluted accusations were convoluted. And my expectation is that they will be rejected on appeal. I mean, it was a political trial. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you're wrong. I mean, it is if people spend the time to look at the facts of what happened. On top of that, talk about election, it was supposedly convicted for election interference. If we compare the last cycle, when literally the major media companies in America, Google, Facebook, prevented people from sharing, it's incredible when you talk about this, prevented people in America from sharing information about Hunter Biden's laptop, which really could have affected the outcome of the election. People were prevented from doing that. All right, literally, it was impossible. You talk about challenges to democracy. I absolutely believe that the chance of democracy ending are as high, if not higher, if Kamala Harris gets elected, because we have examples of what she did and what she supported in the prior election in terms of preventing that information.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here that I wanted to again, it's a question for both of you. It's about whether this one I'll go to you first, Peter. What, according to you, will the impact be of October 7th on these elections? Meaning, how do you think they might turn out differently as a result of October 7th?
Well, I think there's two things. One is that America has experienced anti-Semitism since October 7th, probably to the extent that has not existed in the United States of America previously. I mean, there are literally almost anti-Semitic instances every day throughout the country, whether on college campuses and other areas, some of which, unfortunately, have become violent. If people have witnessed it, last Saturday, someone screaming out Al-Aqsa shot a Jew in Chicago. It's not the first violent incident that has occurred. The two candidates have been fundamentally different about it. President Trump, in terms of Title VI and the only protection American college students have, the Harris-Biden administration, really because of issues regarding their base, regarding intersectionality support, the squad support in the Democrat, their envision of Muslim support, particularly in Michigan, and hundreds of thousands of voters that specifically did not vote for President Biden because of that. I mean, last night on the clips in front of the White House, if you go online, you can see hundreds of Palestinian supporters waving Palestinian flags in front of Kamala Harris speaking. It's there for anyone to witness. They were not at President Trump's any event. So I think there's two things. One is I think it's heightened people's concern about anti-Semitism. It's also heightens people's concern about Israel and Israel's existential existence. And I think it has also, made Jews in America who felt very comfortable that there would never be anti-Semitism there, that Israel, and in the same way, a parallel with Israel, that Israel is safe, that nothing could ever happen. It happened. October 7th happened. So I think it's energized the Jewish community. I've offered Halie a bet, and I offered it to her again. I'm 100% convinced that Donald Trump will get the largest percentage of Jewish voters in the history of the United States on November 5th. I'm very comfortable with that. I talk to voters every day, Jewish voters, Jewish Democratic voters,
okay.
And that's my expectation.
Okay, thank you. Halie, same question to you. The impact of October 7th on this election.
There's so many things that Peter said I could respond to. I would say that there's no doubt that there has been a rise of anti-Semitism in this country. There's clearly a rise of anti-Israel sentiment. There were 75,000 people on the ellipse last night, Peter. So yes, perhaps some of them, I didn't see it. We were in Philadelphia. Perhaps some of them did have pro-Palestinian flags, but there were 75,000 people there demonstrating just the enthusiasm that exists in our country for the kind of change that Kamala Harris represents. I think that it's important to consider that in light of this rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel views, Kamala Harris has been steadfast and ironclad in her position, unlike Donald Trump, whose position changes depending on what he believes is most politically expedient. And his own advisors have said this, including about Israel. Kamala Harris has not wavered. She said repeatedly on the debate stage and in her acceptance speech, her commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. She has not wavered. And in the aftermath of October 7th, we've seen from her not someone who changes their political position based on what they think would be best with voters or most politically expedient. We have seen her incredibly strong and supportive of Israel's security and right to self-defense, as well as supportive of the Jewish community, of which she is a part due to the second gentleman. And the fact that she has been a great ally in ensuring our security and condemning anti-Semitism. Now, I have to address this issue of the Madison Square Garden rally. I'm glad you had a good time, Peter. The reality is that rally exemplified the hate, vitriol, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and racism that is represented by Donald Trump.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I have a question for you, Halie, now, directed at you. And then there'll be a chance for the congressman to rebut if he wishes. The question starts with a premise. So I'm just going to read it out, and you may or may not accept the premise. I suspect you won't, but let's see. Obama's Middle East policy was to keep a balance of power between Iran, Saudis, Israel, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, etc. So no one country is dominant. Will Kamala continue this policy?
I mean, I think it's important to consider, if we're talking about Iran, it's important to consider the what I consider to be an accomplishment of the Obama administration, which was the fact that there was a nuclear agreement whereby it was verified that Iran was no longer on the track to develop a nuclear weapon. The two pathways to developing a nuclear weapon were, one was completely ended, that's uranium, but another was, plutonium, but one was restricted, and that is uranium. When Donald Trump came into office, Iran was at least a year from acquiring a nuclear weapon due to this agreement. Now, I'm under no illusion this was not a perfect agreement. There were many flaws with this agreement. However, Iran was a year from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and that was being verified by international monitors. When Donald Trump left office, due to the fact that he walked away from that agreement unilaterally with nothing to replace it, Iran was within a month of acquiring a nuclear weapon, which is basically where we are today, within a month to a few weeks, if not that, to acquiring a nuclear weapon. By all accounts, that is an abject failure. Kamala Harris has recognized that Iran is our #1 adversary. She said that recently on 60 Minutes. Donald Trump absolutely failed in preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And Kamala Harris has said that this is a priority. She would not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. She has also said that all options would be on the table. So she will continue what has been this administration's approach to Iran. It's threefold. One has to do with the economic sanctions, which they have continued, the Trump era sanctions, as well as increased them by about 700 sanctions. The second is diplomatic, is ensuring that we have allies and partners with whom we can work to defend against the threat posed by Iran. And the third is military. And we have seen now this administration, Kamala Harris, deploy the U.S. military twice to defend against Iran. This is the first time the U.S. military has been directly deployed to defend against the Iranian threat. And this administration did so recently.
Okay, thank you very much. Congressman, would you like to comment on what you just heard?
Yeah, again, I'm going to try to anyway, that's Kamala Harris's event yesterday.
Yeah, they're outside the gates, Peter.
No, this is inside the gates, Halie.
Okay, I'm not gonna. This is going to be back and forth, so people can check this themselves. They can go online and check this themselves.
I hope to be able to get it. I'm not that tech savvy. Hopefully, people go on. She's waving flags directly in front of thousands of people, Palestinian flags. It is just. Let me talk about Madison Square Garden because you brought it up. I was there. I was there for 8 hours. I think the response of some of the articles in the press calling it a Nazi affair, calling it a fascist affair, calling it a racist affair, it's just not accurate. I think it's unfortunately what we have is in a sense the essence of this debate. The mainstream media in America, the New York Times, Washington Post, literally have done and are going to continue for the next week everything they can do to try to prevent Donald Trump from being elected president, because I think they believe, like Halie believes, that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. If you believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, if you really believe it, if you think there's a 75% chance that that's going to happen, then you probably should not vote for Donald Trump. I just don't think that thought process is sustainable under any kind of critical analysis. I mean, Donald Trump has said this, and I believe it. If you're going to vote for, Kamala Harris, you really need to have your head examined, or you need to at least think through some of the things that we've talked about today.
Okay. We're nearly the end of the time. So we're going to turn now to, firstly, I want to thank audience for their questions. We're going to turn now to closing statements. Halie began, so I'm going to ask Congressman Peter Deutsch to do the first of these closing statements. It's just 2 minutes, and then we'll go to you, Halie. Congressman.
Thank you again, and thank you for everyone who's watching and will watch on the follow-up. I laid it out one time before, but I'm going to mention it again. This election is a choice between two candidates. One candidate who literally is giving money to people that literally are killing your family and will continue to be killing your family if this administration continues. There's no reason to believe that they're going to change. They are changing. And there's another candidate that for 4 years protected your family and made the world a safer place. I think unfortunately, there's a real analogy between how Neville Chamberlain dealt with the Nazis and Adolf Hitler before World War II and the moment in time we're at right now. That is how the Harris-Biden administration is dealing with Iran. They believe that we ought to bring them into the family of nations. We need to work with them. We need to destroy them. They are the enemies. That is the choice that is existing in front of you today. It's important that every person who can vote that's listening to this in Israel votes. One vote literally can make the difference between who's president and who's not president. That's an opportunity that you have. You have an obligation to do that. You have an obligation to talk to your friends, to your families, to your neighbors who can vote. And even if you can't vote, to talk to your friends, neighbors, and relatives in the United States of America and encourage them to vote for Donald Trump for president of the United States.
Thank you very much, Congressman Peter Deutsch. Halie Soifer, final statement from you.
Maya Angelou told us that when someone says who they are, believe them the first time. And time again, Donald Trump has told us and shown us exactly who he is: a bigot, a felon, and a dangerous right-wing extremist. He's indecent, he's immoral, and he has repeatedly announced his intention to be a dictator. And he has a 920-page plan written by at least 140 of his allies to become a dictator and threaten our democracy. He's aligned with and dined with anti-Semites and white supremacist leader Nick Fuentes. Peter and others encourage us to overlook all of this because of his alleged support of Israel. Now, this argument is flawed because Donald Trump's support of Israel is at best transactional and solely about himself. That is what his former national security advisor has told us. And frankly, it's what he's demonstrated when he said that Israel's survival, its mere existence, is contingent on his winning this election. Kamala Harris, and this as coming from her former national security advisor, has been steadfast in her support of the U.S. Israel relationship and her partnership with Jewish Americans, including as we face a scourge of hatred and anti-Semitism. She stands with us, which is why I am confident that 7 out of 10 Jewish Americans will stand with her in this critically important election. And again, the U.S. Israel relationship has endured now 75 years, no matter who is elected in either country. And it should continue and will continue, no matter who is elected in this election. That is incredibly important. And it's something that Kamala Harris understands. Donald Trump, on the other hand, as with everything else, has made Israel's existence contingent on himself, which is just a real representation of who he is and exactly why we must ensure that he is defeated.
Okay, thank you very much, Halie Soifer. I want to thank both of you very, very much, both for your time and for the spirit in which this debate has been conducted in civil discourse, which is not to be taken for granted at these times in particular. I think it's looking at it from the outside here in Israel, and I don't have a vote as a British Israeli. It's clearly something which is dividing America greatly, and dividing American Jews and Israelis in many ways. And all I think Israelis can hope for is that Americans, those that have the vote, can inform themselves, read up, and really think about what's important to them, their values, who's better for Israel, who's better for the Jewish people. And you have both, from your very different perspectives, done your very best to make the case for your candidates today. So thank you very, very much for that. I just remains me to say I hope Americans, those that vote, those still need to vote, then go and vote. It's a civic duty. It's important. It keeps the democracy that both America and Israel share alive. So thank you both very, very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.